As we discussed in the introduction to this training, this sixth paragraph is about planning. Planning represents the ability to anticipate events and to ensure that what is being planned is achieved. Very logically, the first requirement of Chapter 6.1 concerning the actions to be taken in the face of risks and opportunities takes on special importance in ISO 45001. Therefore, I propose that this time I analyze each subparagraph one after the other. Let's start first with the paragraph 6.1.1, Generality. The notion of coherence, first of all. These generalities recall the need to design the provisions of the management system in a coherent, logical manner with the issues at stake, the requirements chosen, and the scope of application retained. No standard can be satisfied with copy-paste of existing provisions or documents or ready-made models. But ISO 45001 even less so. This notion of coherence and adaptation of the system to the realities of the organization in relation to existing works and places is fundamental to ensure that safety is really taken into account and controlled. As already discussed previously, the requirements of this paragraph 6.1.1 specify once again 4 fundamental axes: setting safety objectives and measuring the results, prevention before correction, deploying continuous improvement, improving. Still, in general terms, because we will see in the following paragraphs that this is taken up technically and in detail, we are also reminded of the necessary elements to be taken into account in an occupational health and safety management system: hazards, risks, opportunities, and all the requirements, including legal requirements, to build the system. These requirements are generalities. We will see in the following paragraphs how, in concrete terms, they are interpreted and how they are implemented. Let's look at the paragraph 6.1.2, Hazard Identification and Evaluation of Risks and Opportunities, and more precisely at the paragraph 6.1.2.1, Hazard Identification. First fundamental requirement: hazard identification must be based on a clear process, updated as necessary. This implies that the process often needs to be formalized, even if self-supporting documents can ensure that it is carried out. The standard is then very precise about the elements contained in this or these processes. We are not going to list them all, but to specify some of them that deserve special attention. A. It is important to have, here, the most exhaustive identification of the hazards possible. B. The concept of usual and unusual activities is also important. The identification of hazards and the overall approach to safety must take into account the normal functioning and organization of work and allow for the identification of hazards resulting from abnormal situations. For example, the intervention of people from outside the company in the workplace, the implementation of temporary measures because a transformation site is being carried out at a workplace. This point is very important. Often, in the analysis of accident causes, one of the causes is the fact that if all safety measures were understood and ensured in normal operation, it is the abnormal and unforeseen factors that led, through their accumulation, to an accident. For example, one day, the usual operator was being replaced by someone else. That day, the ground was slippery because a truck had a coolant leak. That day, there was a problem with the lighting and brightness in a specific area. C. Feedback from real-life situations must make it possible to review and, if necessary, supplement the identification of hazards. D. The identification of hazards must also take into account the workplaces themselves, process, installation, etc., and therefore cannot be satisfied with a generic approach. For companies subject to the requirement of the single risk assessment document, for example, hazards are almost always identified by location or work area in addition to the typology of hazards. E. The hazards identified, regardless of the control mechanisms implemented, are also re-interviewed when the context changes. For example, the extension or reorganization of a workplace may lead to the appearance of new hazards as well as the removal of some of them. The analysis of hazards, therefore, needs to be re-evaluated. Still in detail, the requirements of paragraph 6.1.2.2, assessment of OSH and other system-related hazards, are as follows. I refer you to the definitions presented in the third module concerning vocabulary. You have understood. After dangers comes risks. Quite logically, the dangers have been identified. It is therefore required to assess the risks. This is very often done with the help of weightings that summarize the importance of the hazards on the one hand, their risk of occurrence on the other hand, and the impact of existing prevention measures. Here, too, this methodology must be perfectly defined since it is on this methodology that the implementation of prevention actions will depend. For example, in a logistics workshop, a hazard may be linked to the co-activities between handling functions using self-propelled trucks and pedestrians. Dangers of collisions or crushing that can lead to serious trauma. If it is a regular activity, the potential frequency of occurrence of this hazard may be high. If it is a regular activity, the potential frequency of occurrence of this hazard may be high. If the preventative measures include the use of barriers that limit and isolate the flow of self-propelled trucks and the flow of pedestrians, then the preventative measures will weigh up the final risk. We are dealing with a high hazard, with an equally high frequency, but with control or prevention that may not require any particular action. Same level of detail for paragraph 6.1.2.3, evaluation of opportunities for SNH and other opportunities related to the SNH management system. Always in the same logic, beyond the analytical and technical approach based on existing hazards, there is also a requirement to go beyond this framework and identify any opportunity in the provisions deployed and in the management system itself to improve this system. Now, paragraph 6.1.3, determination of legal and other requirements. This requirement is simple. A process, for process or procedure reminder, must be conducted to clearly identify the legal requirements and the requirements selected by the organization. In many organizations, this starts with the implementation of a legal and regulatory watch and a normative watch. For example, depending on the regulations to which an organization is subject, a construction company will have to watch and ensure that it complies with regulations concerning the verification of scaffolding, the specific authorization of people working on live installations, certain lifting handling means, and elements likely to contain asbestos. Based on all this, here is the paragraph 6.1.4, Action Planning. It is therefore required, in view of the risks identified and the legal and regulatory requirements, to take action when deemed necessary. Actions whose actual implementation and effectiveness must also be evaluated. By the way, note point A3, which we will discuss later concerning emergency situations. Actions will also have to be identified in order to prepare the organization to face emergency situations when prevention measures have not yet been able to prevent these situations. Let's leave these necessary concerns of hazards, risks, and actions for the requirements of paragraph 6.2, S&H objectives and planning actions to achieve them. I suggest you read the two subparagraphs 6.2.1 and 6.2.2. We have previously discussed these concepts of commitment and policy, including this definition of objectives and the measurement of results against objectives. The requirements of paragraph 6.2 detail what should characterize the S&T objectives: consistency, ability to be measured or evaluated, compliance with requirements, communication and updating, and etc., as well as the minimum requirements for planning actions to achieve the objective set. The actions formalized in the management system must include the nature of the action, the necessary resources, the responsibilities in charge of the actions, the deadlines for carrying them out, and the deadlines for verifying the effectiveness of these actions. This must be recorded at the very least in an action plan, which is obviously monitored and updated. A quick note here. We have discussed the notions of an action plan and previously of procedure. You can access, still free of charge on this YouTube channel, a playlist on procedures and a playlist on action plans. Above all, don't hesitate. You will know everything about how to implement both.